The richest man in Manhattan never touched anyone in public, until the pregnant girl collapsed in front of him. The crystal chandelier above the diamond auction shimmered like frozen stars as Evelyn Carter adjusted the tray of champagne flutes in her trembling hands. The ballroom inside the Grand Astoria Hotel glowed with gold light, polished marble, and the quiet arrogance of people who had never worried about rent in their lives. Men in tailored tuxedos laughed beside glass cases filled with $40 million in rare blue diamonds, while women draped in silk and emeralds whispered behind perfect smiles. Evelyn tried not to look at them too long. She was only there to refill glasses and replace floral arrangements before the charity auction began. At 27 years old and 7 months pregnant, she had learned how to become invisible. Invisible women survived New York. Invisible women avoided judgment. During dinner once, rumor also said he secretly donated millions to children's hospitals under fake names. Nobody knew which stories were true anymore. Evelyn had only seen him once before on a magazine cover at the grocery store checkout line. But seeing him in person felt different. Colder somehow. His charcoal suit looked perfectly tailored against his broad shoulders, and the silver cufflinks caught the ballroom lights every time he moved his hand. People shifted around him nervously like planets orbiting something dangerous. Then his eyes lifted. Directly toward her. Evelyn froze for half a second. The room suddenly tilted sideways. A sharp ringing filled her ears as the tray slipped slightly in her hands. She tried to steady herself, but another wave of dizziness hit harder this time. The lights blurred into white streaks. Someone near the stage laughed. Another person gasped. Then came the sound of crystal exploding across marble. Champagne splashed across the floor as Evelyn stumbled forward, one hand instinctively wrapping around her stomach. Pain tightened low in her abdomen. The ballroom went silent. Completely silent. Hundreds of wealthy strangers watched the pregnant waitress collapse beside the diamond display. Nobody moved. Nobody except Alexander Vaughn. Chairs scraped violently against the marble floor as the billionaire crossed the ballroom faster than security could react. He dropped to his knees beside Evelyn without hesitation, his expensive suit pressing against spilled champagne and shattered glass. "Call my doctor," he ordered sharply, his deep voice cutting through the frozen silence. Then he shrugged off his cashmere coat and wrapped it carefully around her shaking shoulders before placing one protective hand over her belly as if shielding both her and the child from the entire room. And for the first time in years, Alexander Vaughn looked terrified. The ambulance lights painted the rain-soaked streets of Manhattan red and blue as Alexander Vaughn sat beside Evelyn Carter inside the private emergency vehicle, one hand braced against the leather seat, while the other stayed close to her trembling fingers without fully touching them. The paramedics moved quickly around her, checking monitors, adjusting blankets, speaking in calm professional voices, but Alexander barely heard any of it. His eyes stayed fixed on the pale pregnant woman lying beneath the white hospital sheet as if looking away for even 1 second might somehow make her disappear. "Blood pressure is stabilizing," one medic finally announced. "The baby's heartbeat sounds strong." Alexander exhaled slowly for the first time since the ballroom. Across from him, Evelyn blinked weakly against the fluorescent lights overhead. Her vision slowly sharpened until she recognized the dark figure sitting beside her. The billionaire's jaw was tight, his charcoal tie loosened slightly, rainwater still clinging to the edges of his black hair. He looked nothing like the polished man from magazine covers now. He looked exhausted. "I am sorry," Evelyn whispered automatically, embarrassed heat rushing to her cheeks. "I ruined your event." One of the paramedics glanced up in confusion, but Alexander answered before anyone else could. "You collapsed," he said quietly. "That is not ruining anything." His voice was lower now. Controlled. Careful. The kind of voice people used around fragile things. Evelyn swallowed hard and tried to sit up too quickly. Pain tugged through her lower stomach instantly, forcing her back against the stretcher with a sharp inhale. Alexander reacted before the medics did, his hand instinctively reaching toward her shoulder. "Easy," he said. "Do not move yet." The gesture surprised both of them. He pulled his hand back almost immediately, but the warmth lingered between them anyway. Outside the ambulance windows, camera flashes exploded against the glass. Reporters were already gathering outside the hospital entrance. Evelyn's chest tightened with panic. "No," she whispered. "Please do not let them photograph me." Alexander turned toward the dark windows, his expression hardening instantly into something colder. More dangerous. "They will not." The ambulance doors opened seconds later, and chaos erupted outside. Reporters shouted questions over one another while security guards formed a wall near the entrance. "Mr. Vaughn, who? Is the pregnant woman? Is this your girlfriend? Are the rumors true?" Alexander stepped out first. Tall. Sharp. Untouchable again. Except this time, instead of walking away from the attention like he usually did, he turned back toward the ambulance and personally helped the pregnant waitress into his arms before anyone else could touch her. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Manhattan had never seen Alexander Vaughn carry a woman before. Not publicly. Not gently. Evelyn instinctively curled closer against him as camera shutters exploded like fireworks around them. She hated the attention. Hated the way strangers stared at her swollen belly and worn shoes and tired face. But Alexander moved through the storm of flashing lights as if none of it mattered. One arm supported her back while the other shielded her stomach from the cameras. Protective. Possessive almost. Inside the private hospital wing, the noise vanished behind heavy glass doors and soft, golden lighting. Nurses rushed forward immediately. "Prepare Suite 7. One doctor instructed. Full prenatal evaluation." Evelyn blinked in confusion. Suite 7 looked less like a hospital room and more like a luxury hotel. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glowing Manhattan skyline while cream-colored blankets covered a king-sized medical bed near the center of the room. Fresh orchids sat beside sparkling mineral water bottles on the marble counter. Somewhere in the distance, soft piano music drifted through hidden speakers. Evelyn stared at everything in disbelief. "There has to be a mistake," she murmured. "I cannot afford this." Alexander stood near the doorway while removing his watch slowly, exhaustion visible beneath his calm expression. "You are not paying for it." "Mr. Vaughn, I really cannot, Alexander." She looked up. "What?" "You can call me Alexander." The room fell strangely quiet after that. No billionaire should have sounded that gentle saying his own name. A nurse approached with paperwork, but before Evelyn could panic over insurance forms, Alexander signed everything himself without even reading the total. Tens of thousands of dollars disappeared beneath a single stroke of ink. Evelyn stared at him in shock. "Why are you doing this for me?" she asked softly. For 1 second, something unreadable flickered across Alexander's face. Pain, maybe? Memory? Regret? Then his expression closed again like a locked door. "Because no woman carrying a child should ever be alone tonight," he answered quietly. Hours later, after the doctors confirmed both mother and baby were stable, Evelyn woke briefly to the sound of rain against the windows. The room lights were dim now. Most people would have gone home hours ago. But across the room, Alexander Vaughn still sat there in silence with his suit jacket folded beside him and untouched coffee growing cold in his hands while he watched over a pregnant stranger like losing her would destroy him. By sunrise, the entire city was talking about the pregnant waitress in Alexander Vaughn's arms. Every entertainment channel replayed the footage on loop. The billionaire kneeling on a marble floor. The cashmere coat wrapped around her shoulders. The way his hand covered her stomach protectively while cameras flashed around them. Some called it romantic. Others called it suspicious. Online headlines spread faster than the morning traffic crawling through Manhattan. Who is Alexander Vaughn's mystery woman? Billionaire secret baby scandal? Pregnant gold digger or future Mrs. Vaughn? Evelyn saw all of it the moment she opened her eyes the next morning. Soft sunlight filtered through the hospital suite windows while a muted television mounted near the wall played clips from the gala. Her stomach dropped instantly. "Oh no!" she whispered, grabbing the remote with shaking hands. A sharp knock interrupted her panic before she could switch the screen off. Then the door opened slowly. Alexander stepped inside carrying 2 paper coffee cups and a white bakery box tied with pale blue ribbon. He had changed clothes sometime during the night, but exhaustion still lingered beneath his eyes. The billionaire who terrified boardrooms across the country suddenly looked like a man who had not slept at all. "The doctors said you should eat something," he said quietly as he placed the bakery box beside her bed. The smell of warm cinnamon rolls instantly filled the room. Evelyn blinked in confusion. "How did you know I like cinnamon?" For the first time, something almost human softened his expression. "You stared at the pastry tray at the gala for 10 seconds before walking away from it." She stared at him silently after that. Nobody noticed things like that anymore. Not since before the pregnancy. Not since Daniel. The thought of her ex tightened painfully in her chest. She looked down at the blanket covering her stomach. "You should not have stayed here all night," she murmured. "People are already talking." Alexander glanced briefly toward the television screen, still flashing headlines about them. "People always talk. Not about me." "They do now." The words should have sounded arrogant. Instead, they sounded strangely apologetic. A nurse entered moments later carrying test results and smiling far too brightly. "Good news," she announced. "The baby looks healthy. However, your stress levels are concerning. You need bed rest for at least 2 weeks." Evelyn's heart sank immediately. "That is impossible." The nurse hesitated awkwardly. "Miss Carter, your blood pressure nearly caused early labor last night." "I understand, but I cannot stop working." She swallowed hard before adding quietly. "Rent in Brooklyn is not exactly forgiving." The room fell silent. Alexander leaned back slightly in his chair, studying her carefully. "You work 7 days a week?" Evelyn gave a small embarrassed nod. "Florist deliveries in the morning. Catering events at night. While 7 months pregnant. Babies are expensive." His jaw tightened faintly at her answer. Not judgment. Anger maybe. But not toward her. The nurse quietly left the room, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Alexander stood slowly and walked toward the massive windows overlooking Manhattan. Snow had started falling lightly between the skyscrapers, soft white flakes drifting past the glass. "Do you have family helping you?" he asked without turning around. Evelyn looked down at her hands. "No, friends? Not really anymore." "And the father?" Her silence answered before she did. Alexander finally turned back toward her then. Something colder settled behind his eyes. "He left." She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. 3 months ago. The second he found out I was pregnant." The billionaire said nothing for several seconds. Manhattan traffic hummed faintly 30 floors below while snow continued falling outside like ash against the skyline. "What was his name?" Alexander asked eventually. "Daniel Mercer." The moment the name left her lips, recognition flickered across Alexander's face. Quick. Sharp. Controlled. "Daniel Mercer," he repeated slowly. "Financial analyst. Mercer Capital." Evelyn looked surprised. "You know him?" "I know of him." His voice cooled noticeably. "Everyone in finance knows everyone." But there was something else in his expression now. Something unreadable. Before Evelyn could ask another question, the television suddenly switched to breaking news footage from outside the hospital. Reporters crowded against barricades while a familiar man stepped in front of the cameras wearing an expensive navy coat and a carefully rehearsed expression of concern. Evelyn's breath caught instantly. "Daniel. I am deeply worried about Evelyn," he told reporters dramatically. "She has been under a lot of emotional pressure lately." Alexander's posture stiffened beside the window. "And if the child she is carrying is mine," Daniel continued carefully, "then I intend to do the responsible thing." Evelyn went completely pale. "He does not mean that," she whispered. "He never wanted this baby." But Alexander was no longer watching the television calmly. His face had gone perfectly still in the most dangerous way possible. Cold. Controlled. Billionaire investors feared that expression. Entire companies collapsed under that expression. Interesting, he said quietly. Evelyn looked up at him nervously. What? Alexander reached for the remote and switched the television off with one sharp click before turning back toward her. Last night, he said softly, that man told reporters outside this hospital that he had never met you before in his life. The silence inside the hospital suite felt heavier after the television went dark. Snow continued drifting beyond the windows while Evelyn sat frozen beneath the blankets, one hand unconsciously resting over her stomach. She could still hear Daniel's voice in her head pretending to care for cameras after disappearing for months without a single phone call. I do not understand, she whispered softly. Why would he lie? Alexander remained standing beside the television, his expression unreadable. Because men like Daniel Mercer never move without calculating the outcome first. Evelyn looked up slowly. What does that mean? Alexander loosened the cuff of his sleeve with controlled movements, but tension lingered beneath every motion. It means yesterday he denied knowing you because a pregnant waitress would damage his public image. Today he claims concern because your face is attached to mine. The words landed harder than Evelyn expected because deep down she knew he was right. The internet had already turned her into a headline overnight. She swallowed painfully and looked away toward the falling snow. I never wanted any of this attention. Alexander studied her quietly for several seconds. Most people do. I am not most people. Something about the honesty in her voice shifted the atmosphere between them again. Softer this time. More dangerous in a different way. A knock interrupted before either of them spoke again. Two women entered carrying garment bags, shopping boxes, and fresh white flowers. Behind them followed an older doctor holding a digital tablet. Evelyn blinked in confusion. What is all this? Alexander answered calmly. Your apartment building has no elevator, your doctor ordered bed rest, and the press already knows your address. Her eyes widened instantly. Wait, how do you know where I live? My security team checked after the hospital received threats from reporters trying to access your floor. Evelyn's face lost color. Threats? Nothing dangerous, he said quickly, noticing her panic. But your privacy no longer exists there. One of the women carefully hung several soft cashmere maternity outfits near the closet while the other arranged skincare products and prenatal vitamins across the marble bathroom counter. Everything looked expensive. Impossibly expensive. Alexander, Evelyn said nervously, I cannot accept all this. You need stress-free recovery. I need my job. Your employer already received full payment for the next month. Her mouth fell open slightly. You paid my salary? Yes. Without asking me? His gaze held hers evenly. Would you have agreed? She opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. Because honestly, no. She probably would have refused out of pride and returned to carrying heavy trays until her body collapsed again. The realization frustrated her more than she expected. You cannot solve every problem with money, she whispered. Something flickered briefly behind Alexander's eyes at that sentence. Not anger. Hurt almost. No, he said quietly. I learned that a long time ago. Before Evelyn could ask what he meant, the doctor stepped forward with a warm smile. Miss Carter, your latest scans look excellent. However, stress hormones are still elevated. You need calm surroundings, proper sleep, and consistent nutrition. Evelyn glanced awkwardly around the luxury hospital suite. I think the surroundings part is covered. The older doctor laughed softly before turning toward Alexander. She also needs emotional stability. Alexander's expression tightened slightly at the phrase. Emotional stability. As if billionaires were trained for mergers and lawsuits but not feelings. The doctor eventually left, and silence returned once more. Evelyn slowly touched one of the folded cashmere sweaters beside her bed. It felt softer than anything she had ever owned. Why are you really doing this? She asked quietly. Alexander looked toward the snow outside again before answering. Because nobody protected someone important to me when they should have. The room went still after that. Evelyn watched his reflection faintly in the glass windows. Powerful billionaire. Cold reputation. $1 billion empire. Yet somehow he looked lonelier than anyone she had ever seen. Then his phone buzzed sharply in his pocket. He glanced at the screen once and his entire expression darkened instantly. "What is it?" Evelyn asked nervously. Alexander slowly lowered the phone. "Daniel Mercer just filed a legal request for a prenatal paternity test." The words hit Evelyn harder than the hospital collapse. For a moment she could only stare at Alexander while snow drifted silently outside the towering windows behind him. "A paternity test?" she repeated weakly. "He cannot do that." Alexander's jaw tightened faintly. "Legally, he can request one." Evelyn looked away immediately, shame and exhaustion crashing through her chest all over again. Daniel had vanished the second she told him about the pregnancy. No calls. No support. No apology. Just silence. And now suddenly he wanted legal rights to a child he had not cared about for 7 months. Her hand instinctively moved protectively across her stomach. "He never wanted this baby," she whispered. "He said becoming a father would destroy his career." The billionaire remained silent for a second too long. Then he crossed the room slowly and placed a thick folder on the marble table beside her bed. "Read page 6. Evelyn frowned in confusion before opening the folder carefully. Inside were printed screenshots, financial articles, and legal documents. Most carried Daniel Mercer's name somewhere across the pages. "What is this?" she asked nervously. "Research. On my ex-boyfriend? On the man trying to insert himself into your life after appearing on national television." Evelyn flipped through several pages before her eyes widened. Debt reports. Investment losses. Pending lawsuits connected to Mercer Capital. One article described Daniel as a rising financial analyst 6 months ago. Another described his recent collapse after a failed merger cost investors millions. "Oh my God!" she whispered. Alexander's voice stayed cold and steady. "Daniel Mercer is nearly bankrupt." Suddenly everything made horrible sense. The television interview. The fake concern. The sudden interest in fatherhood after months of disappearing. Tears burned behind Evelyn's eyes before she could stop them. "So this is about money," she said quietly. "Not the baby." Alexander did not answer immediately because they both already knew the truth. A sharp knock interrupted the heavy silence. One of Alexander's assistants entered holding an iPad with visible anxiety written across her face. "Sir," she said carefully, "the media situation is escalating." Alexander barely looked up. "Explain." The woman hesitated before turning the screen toward them. Social media exploded with rumors. Some accounts accused Evelyn of trapping billionaires for money. Others claimed she had secretly dated Alexander for months. One trending video showed clips of Evelyn collapsing at the gala, slowed dramatically beside headlines calling her the billionaire baby mystery. Thousands of strangers debated her morality like she was entertainment instead of a terrified pregnant woman. Evelyn's stomach twisted painfully. "Turn it off," she whispered. The assistant looked toward Alexander immediately. "No," he ordered sharply. The screen disappeared at once. But the damage already lingered across Evelyn's face. She looked smaller somehow sitting against the oversized hospital pillows while millions of strangers judged her life from behind phone screens. Alexander watched her carefully. "None of this changes who you are." She laughed softly through the tears threatening her composure. "You do not even know who I am." "I know enough." "No, you know headlines." Her voice cracked slightly now. "You know a girl who fainted at your event and suddenly became a public scandal." Alexander stepped closer slowly. "I know you worked 2 jobs while pregnant because you refused to give up." His eyes stayed locked on hers. "I know you apologized after collapsing because you were worried about inconveniencing other people instead of yourself." Another step closer. "And I know that every nurse on this floor likes you because you thank them every single time they bring water into this room." Evelyn stared at him speechless after that. Nobody had spoken about her like that before. Like kindness counted for something. The assistant quietly exited, sensing the shift between them. Outside the windows, Manhattan glowed silver beneath the falling snow, while soft piano music drifted faintly through the hospital suite again. Then Alexander's phone rang. One glance at the caller ID darkened his expression instantly. "Who is it?" Evelyn asked nervously. "Vanessa Holloway." Evelyn frowned. "The fashion influencer? And one of Daniel Mercer's newest public supporters, apparently." Before Evelyn could respond, Alexander answered the call on speaker. A bright, feminine voice immediately filled the room. "Alexander, darling, I just wanted to warn you before tonight's live stream." His expression hardened. "What live stream?" Vanessa laughed lightly. "Oh, come on. The whole city is obsessed with your little pregnant Cinderella story. Daniel agreed to an exclusive interview tonight." Evelyn's face drained of color. "What kind of interview?" Alexander asked coldly. Vanessa's voice turned sugary sweet. "The kind where he explains how desperate women manipulate wealthy men using babies." Silence slammed into the room. Then, for the first time since Evelyn met him, Alexander Vaughn smiled. But there was nothing warm about it. It was the calm smile of a billionaire about to ruin someone's entire future. "Cancel the live stream," he said softly. Vanessa laughed again. "And if I do not?" Alexander's eyes never left Evelyn's trembling face as he answered. "Then tomorrow morning you will wake up unemployed, unverified, and permanently removed from every luxury brand partnership in New York." By midnight, every major gossip account in New York had deleted Vanessa Holloway's scheduled live stream announcement. Her luxury sponsors disappeared one by one within hours. Fashion labels quietly unfollowed her accounts. Invitations to upcoming charity galas vanished from her calendar. The internet noticed immediately. "What happened to Vanessa?" became a trending topic before sunrise. But inside the private hospital suite, none of that mattered to Evelyn Carter anymore. She sat curled near the giant windows wearing one of the cream-colored cashmere sweaters Alexander's assistant had brought earlier while soft snow continued falling over Manhattan below. Her fingers rested lightly over her stomach as the baby shifted beneath her palm. Calm. Alive. Safe for now. Across the room, Alexander stood beside the coffee machine speaking quietly into his phone. "No interviews," he said coldly. "No statements. If Mercer's legal team contacts the hospital again, redirect everything through my attorneys." He ended the call without waiting for a response. Evelyn watched him silently for a moment. Even exhausted, he carried himself with complete control. Like a man who had spent his entire life cleaning up disasters before they reached him. Yet tonight something felt different. More personal. More emotional. "You did not have to destroy her career because of me," Evelyn said softly. Alexander looked over his shoulder. "I did not destroy anything." "Then what happened?" He poured hot tea into a porcelain cup before answering. Vanessa built her reputation around public cruelty. People eventually stopped rewarding that. Evelyn almost smiled at the careful billionaire answer. Almost. Alexander walked toward her slowly and handed her the tea. The warmth spread through her cold fingers instantly. Chamomile. Honey. Exactly the kind she liked. "How did you know this too?" she asked quietly. "You asked the nurse for it earlier." Again with the noticing. The tiny impossible details nobody else ever remembered. Evelyn looked down at the steam rising from the cup because suddenly looking directly at him felt dangerous somehow. Outside the windows, helicopter lights drifted above the snowy skyline while the city below continued moving endlessly through the night. "You have not gone home once," she murmured. "Neither have you. This is not my home." Silence settled between them again. Softer now. The kind of silence that slowly stops feeling uncomfortable. Alexander loosened the cuffs of his shirt before finally sitting across from her near the windows. The distance between them was still careful. Respectful. But no longer cold. "Can I ask you something?" Evelyn said quietly. He nodded once. Why do children affect you this much? For the first time since she met him, Alexander Vaughn looked caught off guard. Not angry. Not defensive. Just still. His eyes drifted toward the snow outside as if searching for something buried inside the storm itself. Several long seconds passed before he finally spoke. 10 years ago, he said quietly, I was engaged. Evelyn blinked in surprise. The billionaire never spoke publicly about relationships. Her name was Claire. His voice remained calm, but something fragile lived beneath every word now. She was an architect. Loud. Stubborn. Impossible to impress. A faint smile touched his mouth briefly before disappearing again. She loved winter. Said New York looked honest in the snow because everything slowed down long enough to breathe. Evelyn stayed silent. Some stories needed space to survive. Alexander looked down at his hands. Claire was pregnant. The room suddenly felt smaller somehow. More intimate. We were 3 weeks away from the wedding when... He stopped himself. Swallowed once. There was an accident during a snowstorm in Connecticut. Evelyn's chest tightened instantly. Alexander rarely hesitated when speaking. But now every sentence seemed heavier than the last. I made it to the hospital too late, he continued softly. I never got to meet my daughter. Snow drifted slowly behind him, while the city lights blurred against the glass. The billionaire everyone feared suddenly looked painfully human, sitting there beneath the dim hospital lights with grief still haunting his voice after an entire decade. Evelyn's eyes filled before she could stop them. Alexander, after that, he said quietly, I stopped building anything that could disappear. The words landed deep because suddenly everything about him made sense. The cold reputation. The emotional walls. The obsession with control. $1 billion companies were easier to manage than love because companies could not die in your arms. Evelyn slowly set her teacup aside. That is why you stayed, she whispered. He looked at her then. Really looked at her. The night you collapsed, he admitted softly. For 1 second I thought I was watching history repeat itself. Neither of them spoke after that. The baby kicked gently beneath Evelyn's sweater as if responding to the emotion hanging in the room. Alexander's eyes instinctively dropped toward the movement. Something softened across his face immediately. Wonder maybe. Longing. Fear. Then suddenly the quiet shattered. A loud knock echoed through the suite doors before one of Alexander's security guards stepped inside looking unusually tense. Sir, he said carefully. Daniel Mercer is downstairs in the lobby. Evelyn's breath caught instantly. But the next sentence hit even harder. And he brought the press with him. The atmosphere inside the hospital suite changed instantly after the security guard spoke. 1 second earlier, soft piano music and falling snow had wrapped the room in fragile warmth. The next, tension crashed through the air so sharply Evelyn could feel it in her chest. No, she whispered immediately. Please tell me he did not come here. The guard shifted awkwardly near the doorway. He is in the main lobby with at least 12 reporters. They somehow learned which hospital floor Miss Carter is staying on. Alexander stood slowly from his chair near the windows. Calm. Too calm. The dangerous kind of calm powerful men carried right before destroying something permanently. How did security allow this? He asked quietly. Sir, Mercer arrived claiming he was the father of an unborn child being denied access. Evelyn felt sick instantly. Of course Daniel would use that angle publicly. Not because he cared. Because sympathy created headlines. And headlines created leverage. I do not want to see him, she whispered, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. Then you will not. Alexander's voice cut through the room with absolute certainty. He reached for his suit jacket draped over the nearby chair, his expression unreadable now. Cold billionaire mode. The side of him the business world feared. But before he could leave the room, Evelyn suddenly grabbed his wrist. The contact froze both of them for half a heartbeat. Alexander, she said softly, please do not make this worse. He looked down at her hand resting against his sleeve. Small. trembling slightly. Human. His voice lowered immediately. He already made it worse by coming here. He wants attention. And he chose the wrong hospital for that. Outside the suite windows, snow continued drifting across Manhattan while camera flashes flickered faintly below near the hospital entrance. Evelyn suddenly imagined herself becoming tomorrow's headline again. Pregnant woman trapped between billionaire and ex-boyfriend. Social media would turn her entire life into entertainment by sunrise. Her stomach tightened painfully. Instantly Alexander noticed. "Breathe," he said quietly, kneeling beside her chair without hesitation. "Look at me." She tried. Slow breaths. His hand hovered near hers carefully, never forcing contact. "The baby feels your stress." Evelyn closed her eyes briefly and followed his voice until the pain slowly eased again. When she looked back up, Alexander's expression had softened into something dangerously close to concern. Real concern. Not obligation. Not pity. Something deeper. Then the television mounted near the wall suddenly switched on automatically with a breaking news alert. Someone downstairs had leaked footage to the media already. Daniel Mercer stood inside the hospital lobby wearing an expensive camel coat, while reporters crowded around him with microphones. His face looked carefully emotional beneath the bright camera lights. "I simply want to support the mother of my child," he announced dramatically. "But certain powerful individuals are trying to isolate her from me." Evelyn stared at the screen in disbelief. "He is lying," she whispered. Daniel continued speaking. "I made mistakes in the past, but I am trying to do the right thing now as a future father." Alexander's jaw hardened visibly beside her. But then Daniel smiled slightly toward the cameras before adding the sentence that changed everything. "And frankly, I think Alexander Vaughn is exploiting a vulnerable pregnant woman for publicity." Silence slammed into the suite. Even the falling snow outside suddenly felt colder somehow. The billionaire slowly stood to his full height while staring at the television. Every emotion disappeared from his face completely. No anger. No frustration. Worse. Absolute control. "Turn that off," Evelyn whispered weakly. Alexander picked up the remote but did not shut the television off immediately. Instead, he watched Daniel for another long second. Calculating. Reading him. "He is scared," Alexander said quietly. Evelyn frowned. "Scared?" Bankrupt men always panic when they realize someone richer entered the room. Then finally the screen went black. A few seconds later, another knock echoed. Through the suite doors. This time it was Alexander's attorney, Eleanor Whitmore, a sharp silver-haired woman in a navy designer suit who carried herself like someone who had ended careers before breakfast. "We have a problem," she announced immediately. "Mercer's interview just triggered public sympathy online. Several media outlets are questioning why Evelyn is staying under your protection." Evelyn lowered her eyes immediately, shame washing over her again. Eleanor noticed. "This is not your fault, sweetheart," she said gently before turning back toward Alexander. "But there is another issue." Alexander crossed his arms slowly. "What now?" Eleanor handed him a tablet displaying a newly published article. His expression darkened instantly while reading it. "What is it?" Evelyn asked nervously. Eleanor hesitated briefly. "Someone leaked photos of your apartment building." Evelyn's heart stopped. "What?" "Reporters are already interviewing your neighbors in Brooklyn." Panic flooded her chest immediately. "My landlord still has my baby things there." Alexander looked up sharply. "What baby things?" Tears filled Evelyn's eyes before she could stop them. "The nursery furniture," she whispered. "The crib I spent 6 months saving for." The room fell silent. Then Alexander reached for his phone without another word. "What are you doing?" Evelyn asked shakily. His eyes never left the screen as he answered. "Sending security to your apartment." "Alexander, it is just furniture." "No," he said quietly. "It is your child's first home." Then his expression turned ice cold again as another notification appeared on his phone screen. Daniel Mercer had just announced a live press conference for the next morning. And this time, he planned to bring proof. The next morning, Manhattan woke up obsessed with a war between a billionaire and a pregnant woman's ex-boyfriend. News helicopters circled above Midtown while reporters crowded outside the hospital entrance before sunrise hoping to catch a glimpse of Alexander Vaughn, or the mysterious pregnant waitress who had somehow become the center of the city's attention overnight. Inside the private suite 30 floors above the chaos, Evelyn sat quietly near the windows wearing soft cream pajamas while watching snow melt slowly against the glass. She barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw cameras. Headlines. Daniel pretending to care in front of strangers after abandoning her completely. A gentle knock interrupted the silence before the door opened. Alexander stepped inside carrying a large white shopping bag from a luxury baby boutique on Madison Avenue. His dark coat still carried traces of snow across the shoulders, and exhaustion lingered beneath his eyes again. But the second he saw Evelyn awake, something in his expression softened immediately. "You disappeared," she murmured quietly. "For 3 hours. I had meetings." He placed the shopping bag carefully beside the sofa near her. Evelyn glanced inside and froze. Tiny baby clothes folded perfectly in pale blue and cream. Cashmere blankets. Handmade stuffed animals. A silver moon-shaped music box. Her throat tightened instantly. "Alexander, before you say no," he interrupted gently. "The boutique owner threatened to cry if I left without buying half the store." A small laugh escaped her before she could stop it. The sound seemed to catch him off guard. Like he had forgotten people could still laugh around him. "There it is," he said softly. "What?" "The smile everyone keeps trying to take away from you." Her cheeks warmed instantly, and she looked down at the tiny knitted socks in her hands before he could notice. But Alexander already had. He noticed everything. Then his phone buzzed sharply across the marble counter. One glance at the screen erased the softness from his face. "The press conference starts in 20 minutes, he said quietly. Evelyn's stomach twisted painfully. "I do not want to watch it." "You will not." "Alexander, if he really has proof." He stepped closer slowly. "Whatever he says downstairs changes nothing about your worth." The words hit harder than she expected because nobody had defended her dignity in a very long time. Another knock interrupted before she could answer. Eleanor Whitmore entered carrying a tablet and several legal folders tucked beneath her arm. Her expression looked sharper than usual. "Mercer rented the Grand Regent Ballroom for the press conference," she announced immediately. "Over 100 media outlets confirmed attendance." Evelyn blinked in disbelief. "A ballroom? He wants spectacle," Alexander said coldly. Eleanor handed him the tablet. And he succeeded. The live stream countdown already showed over 2 million viewers waiting online. Headlines flashed beneath the video preview. "Mercer ready to reveal truth about billionaire baby scandal. Exclusive evidence against Vaughn. Pregnant mystery woman caught between two powerful men." Evelyn felt sick. "Turn it off," she whispered. Alexander immediately lowered the tablet without argument. But then Eleanor hesitated awkwardly before speaking again. "There is another issue." Alexander looked up sharply. "What now?" "Security arrived at Miss Carter's apartment this morning." Evelyn's heart dropped instantly. "Please tell me the nursery is okay." Eleanor's silence answered first. "Reporters broke into the building lobby overnight," she admitted carefully. "Your landlord tried stopping them, but—" Evelyn's breathing faltered immediately. "But what?" Alexander stepped closer instinctively. Eleanor lowered her voice. "Several baby items were destroyed during the chaos." Silence crushed the room completely. Evelyn stared at nothing for several seconds while tears slowly filled her eyes without warning. The crib. The tiny moon lamp she bought at a flea market in Queens. The hand-painted mobile she spent 3 nights making alone in her apartment because she wanted her baby to have at least one beautiful thing. Gone. "I am sorry," Eleanor whispered softly. But Evelyn barely heard her anymore. She lowered her face into trembling hands as quiet tears finally escaped down her cheeks. Not because of the furniture. Not really. It was what it represented. Every small sacrifice she made alone suddenly felt fragile. Temporary. Disposable. The room stayed silent until Alexander slowly crossed the space between them. Then, without hesitation, the billionaire kneeled directly in front of her. "Look at me," he said gently. Evelyn tried shaking her head. He waited patiently. "Evelyn." Finally, she lifted tear-filled eyes toward him. Alexander reached into the pocket of his coat and placed something small into her palm. A silver key. "What is this?" she whispered shakily. His voice softened in a way she had never heard before. "A new home." She stared at him in confusion. "Alexander, 3 floors above my penthouse there is a private residence nobody uses anymore." He held her gaze steadily. "It already has a nursery." Evelyn's breath caught instantly. Alexander continued quietly. "And this time nobody will take it from you." Tears slipped down her cheeks again, but differently now. Softer. Safer somehow. Then suddenly Eleanor's phone rang loudly inside the silent suite. She answered once before her face lost all color. "Alexander," she said carefully, "you need to see this immediately." He took the phone and turned toward the screen. On the live stream downstairs, Daniel Mercer stood beneath bright ballroom lights, smiling confidently beside a giant display monitor. And projected behind him for the entire world to see was a private ultrasound photo Evelyn had never shared with anyone except the baby's father. The entire hospital suite went silent as the ultrasound image filled the phone screen in Alexander Vaughn's hand. Tiny fingers. A small curved profile. The date printed in the corner from 4 months earlier. Evelyn's private appointment. Her throat closed instantly. "How did he get that?" she whispered in horror. Eleanor Whitmore looked equally stunned. "Medical records are protected. He should never have access to that image." But downstairs inside the Grand Regent Ballroom, Daniel Mercer stood confidently beneath the cameras while reporters leaned forward hungry for scandal. "This child is my responsibility," he announced dramatically to millions watching online. "And certain powerful men are manipulating the mother during an emotionally vulnerable time." The live stream comments exploded instantly. Some defended Evelyn. Others accused her of chasing billionaire money. But one sentence began trending everywhere within minutes. "Who leaked the ultrasound?" Evelyn's breathing turned shaky again. "I cannot do this anymore," she whispered. "Every private part of my life keeps becoming entertainment." Alexander slowly lowered the phone. His expression remained calm, but something dangerous moved beneath the surface now. "This ends today." He reached for his coat immediately. Evelyn looked up sharply. "What are you doing?" "Fixing it." "Alexander, no." She stood too quickly from the sofa, pain flashing across her face as she steadied herself against the marble counter. Instantly his attention shifted fully back to her. "Sit down," he said quietly. "I am fine." "Evelyn." The way he said her name stopped her immediately. Not cold. Not commanding. Concerned. Real concern. She slowly lowered herself back onto the sofa while Alexander crouched in front of her again, his eyes searching her face carefully. "Listen to me," he said softly. "You and this baby are my priority now. Not headlines. Not press conferences." Her eyes filled again because nobody had ever chosen her first before. "Not really." Then his phone buzzed sharply once more. This time Alexander answered immediately. "Report." A deep voice echoed through the speaker. "Sir, our cybersecurity division traced the leaked ultrasound image." Alexander's expression darkened instantly. "And? It came directly from Mercer Capital servers." Evelyn blinked in confusion. "What does that mean?" Alexander ended the call slowly before looking at her. "It means Daniel illegally hacked your medical records." The room froze completely. Eleanor Whitmore looked furious now. "That is a federal crime." But Evelyn barely heard her. All she could think about was the tiny ultrasound picture she once stared at alone inside her apartment at 2 in the morning while wondering if she would survive motherhood by herself. Daniel had turned that private moment into a weapon. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks again. "Why would someone do this?" she whispered brokenly. Alexander stared at her for several long seconds before answering quietly. "Because some people only understand love when they think they are losing money." Then suddenly the television mounted near the wall interrupted with another breaking news alert. Reporters downstairs were shouting now. Cameras turned wildly toward the ballroom entrance as black SUVs pulled up outside beneath the falling snow. The broadcast anchor looked stunned. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced breathlessly, "Alexander Vaughn has just arrived at the Grand Regent." Evelyn's heart stopped. Alexander. But he was already standing. Calm. Controlled. Unstoppable. Eleanor looked worried. "If you go down there emotionally, the media will destroy this." Alexander buttoned his dark coat slowly. "Then it is fortunate I stopped caring what the media thinks years ago." Minutes later, the ballroom exploded into chaos as Alexander Vaughn walked through the grand entrance alone beneath blinding camera flashes. The room immediately fell silent. Daniel Mercer stood frozen near the stage while reporters scrambled closer. Alexander moved through the crowd without hesitation until he stopped directly in front of Daniel beneath the massive projected ultrasound image still hanging behind them. "You stole her medical records," Alexander said calmly into the silence. Daniel forced a nervous laugh. "I have rights as the father." "No." Alexander's voice stayed terrifyingly soft. "You had responsibilities as the father. You abandoned those months ago." Murmurs spread through the ballroom instantly. Daniel's confidence visibly cracked for the first time. "You do not even know her," he snapped defensively. "And yet somehow I protected her more in 4 days than you did in 7 months. Silence slammed into the room again. Every camera stayed fixed on the billionaire now. Alexander slowly looked toward the giant ultrasound image projected behind them. Tiny heartbeat. Tiny life. Tiny human already dragged through public humiliation before even being born. His jaw tightened slightly before he turned back toward the crowd. "That child deserves safety," he said quietly. "Not publicity." Then, for the first time all night, emotion finally broke through his perfectly controlled expression. "And Evelyn Carter deserves to be loved without fear." The room went completely still. Reporters lowered microphones. Even Daniel looked shocked. Because everybody watching suddenly realized the same thing at once. Alexander Vaughn was not protecting Evelyn out of obligation anymore. Somewhere between the hospital floor, the falling snow, and the tiny heartbeat on an ultrasound screen, the billionaire had fallen in love with her.